Here's something you should be aware of if you're planning on using plywood siding and staining the wood. So this would be instead of painting it with, let's say, a semi-gloss or a flat paint, you would use a stain or even a paint stain. And even the paint stains, I don't know if the paint stains will have the same problem, but I know regular stain does. So this wouldn't be a bad thing to clarify with your paint supplier. Now you can see right here that there's little spots on the wood, and this is from the filler that the plywood manufacturer used so that they could actually use the plywood and sell it. And like I said, this won't be a problem if you're going to paint it. But this house is stained, and of course you can see that these things stick out like a sore thumb. I mean, it just kind of looks strange. And the bad thing is this is on the front of the house. If you did have some type of stained plywood, if you were going to use stain, and you did have a couple of pieces like this, I'm sure you could put them somewhere where they wouldn't be as noticeable, or simply return them to the manufacturer or the lumber yard where you purchased them. Here's another problem you could run into, and that of course would be any gaps or cracks that would need to be filled with a wood filler or caulking. And these areas would mainly be like where the arrow's pointing to here, underneath the ridge, where the plywood would need to notch around it, and maybe you didn't measure it correctly, and also where the plywood would hit the soffit or the roof eave. And these areas, again, they can all be trimmed out with like a 1x2 something. You could just run a trim, a board all the way around the areas where the plywood butts up against it. This isn't real common to see it where the plywood just butts up against it and is stained. And again, it looks like the carpenter did a pretty good job putting the siding on. And if this was me, I'd probably have problems. I'd have to fill everything, but it looks like they didn't. So there are other ways around that. Instead of using a caulking or a filler, you're probably going to need to trim everything out if you're not a perfectionist. And like I said, someone like me, I'm going to have to use wood trim around this because I know I'm going to have gaps or cracks every once in a while. So I would just plan on doing that from the get-go. So just to reiterate what I said in the video, if you're planning on staining a plywood building, you're going to build a shed or something, and you just want to use some stain, you like the look of it, just make sure that you don't get any plywood that has any wood filler on it. And again, it's just going to require you to actually look at each individual piece of plywood you purchase. And of course, if you do end up getting a load of lumber, let's say you need 100 sheets or 50 sheets sent to the house, just simply put the ones aside that do have filler on them and take them back. And there are going to be cases where you just have one or two small spots that are filled. You might be able to live with that. But as you can see right here, this particular piece looks like it had a machine gun hit it. So I'll leave that up to you whether you decide to use something like that. And don't forget, if you have a spot where you can put something like this underneath the house, underneath the deck, something like that, then there you go. You've got a spot, you can use it, and you won't have to take it back to the lumber yard, and no one will know any better because they won't be able to see it. But don't do what they did here and put it in the front of the house. That is a no-no.